Hello, viewers. Welcome to the first episode of Curious Culture. I like to think of this show. I thought of a motto the other day, bringing America back to itself. And so, as we go forward with this new show, I intend for it to cover the waterfront in terms of art and literature, politics, religion, and occasional guests with views different from my own. I think I can hack different views. I grew up in an Irish-German family where debates were common during the dinner table, but we agreed to disagree by the time dessert arrived. So I think that I don't think there's a cancel culture bone in my body. As my readers know, I'm the arts and culture editor at large for Fedori News Network, which means that I do write for Broad and Liberty and Philly Daily. And I've written about my experiences as a left-wing college student in Baltimore and as a conscientious objector in Boston. And for those who don't know, I was an early gay activist in Boston. By the way, I don't like the term LGBT because I believe that the trans movement has essentially destroyed the gay movement. And most of my early pieces for the underground gay press in Boston were included titles like Straight America, The Moon is on Your Crotch, and How to Kill a Transvestite. How to Kill a Transvestite was an experience that I had in an apartment complex when a married couple tried to actually do violence to a transvestite who was walking near the Boston Common. So I was very much of an activist then, having seen this stuff. But yet at that time, as I've written many times in my columns, it was interesting how the left treated gays and women then. The underground press used the word FAG with utter abandon, and women activists were often regulated to like making the coffee. I happened to be a member of the Boston Gay Liberation Front then, and I did fascinating things like attend Black Panther conventions and whatnot. But then, of course, like years later, the movement changed. Once gay marriage became legal, the elites and the gay organizations didn't want their empires to collapse. And so new funding sources were funneled through new causes, invented causes, like gender equality, the transgender agenda. Now, this occupation, and it really is an occupation, destroyed the movement. Trans became the face of the movement. The drag queens and children, the use of pronouns, truck driver, he-men, identifying as women, and biological men in wigs with muscles invading women's sports. This is the face of the gay movement now, and it's really unfortunate. The gay movement in the late 1960s and throughout the 1970s, this may be an interesting point for viewers who don't know, actually preached against monogamy. And I say this in light of the legalization of gay marriage. I can remember attending meetings then where monogamy was compared to capitalist ownership because it was all about the collective. You had to share everything, finances, even your love interest. So love must be shared. That was the motto then. And as far as human emotions like jealousy go, which is a very, very natural human emotion, that was seen as a flawed thing that had to be corrected vis-a-vis consciousness-raising groups. I can remember then feeling so guilty about natural human emotions that were deemed inappropriate and incorrect then. I think it's ironic now how young gay men are committing themselves to a lifelong commitment based on their libido, based on libido attraction. Despite the fact that recent studies say that 41% of lesbian couples and 27% of young male same-sex couples ended in divorce. The male couples that survive the 7-year itch, as it's commonly referred to, tend to tailor their unions to include the occasional other. I'm not judging this, but certainly marriage, the whole definition of marriage has completely changed. So back in those days, I was an agnostic. I was born into a Roman Catholic family, was very religious as a boy, wanted to be a priest or a monk. I knew I would never marry for some reason. It was just this intuitive knowledge. But then adolescence set in and Vatican II happened. And I watched as the Catholic Mass I loved devolved into a Protestant-style hootenanny with jazz masses and priests twirling hula hoops and nuns who ditched traditional religious habits for lipstick and hoop earrings. It was a real revolution. So I agonized over this when I was 14 years old. And there was only one recourse, one solution. And that was to start reading Bertrand Russell and Jean-Paul Sartre. The demolition of the Catholic Church was proof that there was no God. Years later, though, I returned to the Christian faith, finding theological and liturgical stability in Russian Orthodoxy. This is why I write columns today defending the Society of St. Pius X and Catholic tradition. And while you find me on the opposite side when it comes to promoting women's ordination, altar girls, and the current female so-called Archbishop of Canterbury. I once wrote a column about how some relatives of mine have a never-before-seen photo of Pope Leo, aka Robert Provost, as a seminarian at Villanova, dressed up as Groucho Marx. And so apparently he was going to a Halloween party and some relatives of mine snapped his photo at this party. When I saw the photo, my mind raced back to the 1970s when I would drive my oversized U-boat Pontiac Bonneville up and down Lancaster Pike and occasionally pick up hitchhikers. But when I saw the picture of Pope Leo as a young seminarian, it resembled one or two hitchhikers I gave a ride to in the Bryn Mawr area. I'm still wondering if perhaps I didn't have him in my car. Now, I've written a number of books, fiction and nonfiction. 17 is the latest count. The History of Literary Philadelphia, Architecture, Gilded Mansions, Essays on Famous Gay and Lesbian World Writers and Artists, a book on gay and lesbian Philadelphia, novels, mostly metaphysical sci-fi novels, or with religious themes where the devil appears as a handsome young gay man. Like many other journalists, I've interviewed a slew of celebrities, including Allen Ginsberg, Joan Baez, and scientist Paul Watson, former Mayor Frank Rizzo, who told me at the time that a buddy of his was dying of HIV/AIDS. This completely surprised me because I was able to get the interview with Rizzo from a woman who made me swear that I would not bring up anything connected with the gay movement or with AIDS. But ironically, Rizzo brought it up. When I turned conservative several years ago, it was mainly because of cancel culture and the PC culture posing as a fascist dictatorship. And it really was, and it still is, a fascist dictatorship. Woke Democrats began criticizing me for saying it was okay for an Irish-German white boy to wear an American Indian headdress. This was a big controversy. I wrote something for the HuffPost a long time ago. But the actual first left-wing assault occurred years earlier in the 1980s when ACT UP, an AIDS organization, put me on their enemies list because I wouldn't resign my gay columnist position at the Center City Welcome Mat because a writer there suggested that gay men brought the crisis on themselves. So I didn't budge. I didn't resign my position. Many other gay writers did. So I experienced the fallout from that. And it's quite an experience when you get your first death threat on a telephone. But I weathered it. And I think that every journalist worth his or her salt should experience something like this. But then going full-fledged conservative in many of my columns alienated me from many fellow journalists in the city. Suddenly, it was hard to get speaking engagements at the Franklin Inn Club, the Athenaeum of Philadelphia, and the Library Company of Philadelphia. Because I had always been known as a liberal, even somewhat radical at times. And people even called me at one point Mr. Gay and Lesbian Philadelphia, which I never understood. At least that they could count on me for predictable opinions. And as long as I didn't break the mode, I was okay. Now, it's like my thought that one can be conservative and have some liberal views, and one can be liberal and have some conservative views. Because I question trans ideology, the sanity of DEI, or support for ICE in most instances, does not make me a diehard Orthodox MAGA columnist, as one Philly magazine writer called me in print. So that's why I think that this podcast may be important, to sort of air different views and to try to bring America back to itself in a sensible, sane, nuanced way. I am really happy to introduce my first guest, Bob Small, the author of numerous poetry chapbooks and the founder and president of Poets and Prophets for almost 20 years. Bob, Poets and Prophets was an amazing organization back then. I was a prose writer then, and it was primarily a poetry organization, but you invited me onto the spoken word platform, as it were, then. Of course, after that, you also became involved in politics. You became involved in Green Party politics for a while. You can talk about that, Bob. What was your position with the Green Party?
Okay, with the Green Party, I ended up running with other people, including my wife, the Delaware County Green Party for a while. What happened with the Greens, which happens with a lot of third parties, is the locals seemed to work very well. But when you got to the administration of the state and the federal level, it was a clown show.
Yeah. And then, but you were the first Green Party candidate from Delaware County. Is that true?
Yeah, and I have a little story about this. In 2006, this woman approached us. She had run for the Board of Education in Swarthmore, and she had wanted to run. She had lost the Democratic nomination, but the Board of Education details were such that she could run again in the general election. So she wanted to run as a Republican in a Green Party. And I had wanted to run for judge of elections because they tried to suppress my vote at the primary. That's another story. And anyway, the woman was a woman named Mary Gay Scanlon. Okay. She lost that election, but unfortunately won once after that.
Karma takes its toll.
Yeah.
Another thing, having come from the world of Philadelphia poetry, which is really very cultish in a way, it's a very left-wing bohemian world. There's almost no such thing as a widely published conservative Philadelphia poet who will draw an audience in with a radical from West Philly. I'm like wondering, has there been any flack since your entry into mainstream Republican politics about your hand as a poet?
Yeah, there's, and I'll just explain. I have two different blogs I work with. One's Bill Lawrence Online, and I have a Substack for my poetry. But the reason I got involved with the Swarthmore Republican committee was for 20 years in Swarthmore, it's been all Democratic, okay? But not only has it been all Democratic, it's been all a certain type of Democrat, architects, lawyers, professionals. They don't have anyone on Swarthmore Council who's actually worked for a living or who's a union member. So you get a certain viewpoint. Oh, and there has been one Afro-American in 20 years. I will give them that. But so it's you had mentioned the word cultish. It's a cult there of the Democrats, really.
That is so fascinating to me because growing up, I grew up in heavily Republican Chester County, East Whiteland Township. Yeah. And as a kid, I remember our family was for John F. Kennedy. And when the Nixon trailer came to town, we were amazed at how many people came out. We really felt like a minority. Today, Chester County is almost totally blue. But when you talk about lawyers and architects who are part of the so-called Democrat elite, I see enough of these people in Center City. Ironically, and in a funny way, a lot of the architects seem to have a crown of white hair. They're like all the same type. But it struck me that the elites used to be associated with Republicans, and now there's been a whole change. You get a status quo elite Democrat lawyer. Wouldn't you say that's true?
Yeah,
that's what you're saying. Yeah,
yeah, and Swarthmore, of course, I don't know whether it's a microcosm of the county or the state.
Okay. You also founded a GLB organization. Now, is this for Delaware County or Philadelphia?
Which group were you talking about?
Gay, lesbian, bisexual?
Oh, I didn't find it.
Oh, you didn't? Okay.
No, I found it.
Oh, you found it.
But I was writing for the Bill Lawrence blog an article on GLBT as we were discussing. And by the way, I have someone in Maine who anytime I write something on GLBT, she looks at it and I'll get her critical comments of what I got wrong. But basically, I found there was this group, GLB, which was founded in England, I believe, and they founded it as GLB without the T, okay? And they basically wanted to reclaim the gay and lesbian groups that I remember, Tommy Avicoli, beginning of PGN, all of that back in the 60s and 70s.
Were you a friend of Tommy Avicoli?
Oh, yeah. We worked together actually on a couple different groups. And Tommy and I were friends. I should make it clear, not lovers.
Right.
But we could have been, but we weren't.
Right.
And I think at that point, we were both too much alike anyhow, in certain ways. He's in San Francisco now. The last thing he was working for is senior living for gay and lesbians in San Francisco, an apartment type thing.
Yeah. We have the mutual friend, a great woman by the name of Marilyn Lewis Pollock. Am I pronouncing her last name? Because I always fudge that up when I talk to her.
I think Pollock.
Okay. She used to write for the Inquirer Today magazine. She had a very famous interview column for years, and she published a couple of books, celebrity interviews. And Marilyn told me about your chickens, but I just love the story so much, and I wish that you would share some of the chicken story. Your last favorite chicken died.
Yeah, Red, and that was our last animal guest. I'll put it that way. So now my wife and I realized, hey, we can go to a hotel or motel. We can go out to different things, which we haven't done for about at least 10 years. But when I moved in with Paula, part of the deal was she's always had dogs. So she had dogs and cats, and we had chickens. We actually had a pen built in our backyard, and we did things a little bit differently from the average Swarthmorean. When we were getting new trees, we had to fight the borough, almost literally, to plant fruit trees. And our theory was that you can't eat roses. Okay, well, maybe you can someplace, but you can't eat fruit. And we also have a compost pile. And our backyard probably looks like Grey Gardens or something. But we were always with animals, and what that meant, just when you get up, you have certain things you have to do depending on the animals you have.
So you never roasted any of these chickens. You just used them for the eggs.
Yeah.
So you would take their eggs and make omelets or eggs Benedict,
Yeah.
or however you ate your eggs.
And when they passed, what we do is put them in the backyard where they became dinner for foxes, which was a natural thing to do. And again, we didn't tell our neighbors we were doing this. And recently, we actually even saw a deer in our backyard briefly, who undoubtedly did not have a GPS. So
yeah. I want to ask you about poet Jim Corey, who died about 1.5 years ago. Were you friends with the poet Jim Corey?
Oh yeah, we were friends. And when I was scheduling readings, I always scheduled him. I'll tell you why. He did a book called Walking the Street in the Rain, something like that.
Yeah.
But what he did was, it showed me that I'm in recovery for alcohol, and it showed me that I could quit, that people could quit drinking and still write good poetry. And I let him know that at the time, and that completely changes your life. And I think both Jim and I believed the whole Hemingway myth, or Fitzgerald, that you have to be drunk, on a bunch of whiskey or whatever to be a good writer, and you don't.
That's true. Poets don't all have to end up like Dylan Thomas or F. Scott Fitzgerald. There was this romantic notion that somehow overindulgence in drugs and alcohol produced great art. And I don't know where that came from, but I was a little subject to that at one point too in my 20s. And it was why I never went near organized religion or anything. It was the Arthur Rimbaud effect, I think. You have to change your world. But, Lamont Steptoe is also a friend of yours. He's been a friend of mine. And I somehow associate Lamont Steptoe. I would see him in the city throughout the years. And very, very often when I would see him coming out of a bus, walking out of a subway exit or something, he always announced the death of a Philadelphia poet. So I began to associate him with bad news, another poet has died. It's so bizarre. But when Lamont was in charge of the Walt Whitman Poetry Center in Camden, he told me a scandalous story about Allen Ginsberg, when they had Allen Ginsberg there as the paid primary reader. And Lamont told me, this was a long, long time ago, before this became an issue. He told me that Allen Ginsberg insisted in his contract that he had to have a 15-year-old boy prior to his reading to have a little rendezvous with. And of course, Lamont was scandalized, and he said, "We can't do this. How are we going to placate Ginsberg? I mean, it was against the law. It was against everything. I'm sure the board of directors didn't like it. So what they did, they went out and they found someone who was 19 who looked very, very young, and they fooled Ginsberg. But the fact that they had to put it into the contract just tells you what a different time that was. I think this was in the early 1990s. Have you ever heard that story?
No, I hadn't, but
it just blew me away when I heard it.
But as you were talking about Lamont, a couple things. One of the poems I ended up writing Lamont, was about that whole death thing. And the last line is basically saying, what my fear was is that when Lamont died, he'd tell me. And I sent it to him. He's in the Pacific Midwest now. And actually, Lamont and I did a chapbook together, Small Steps and Toes, in 1983. And when I first came on the scene, I was nobody, okay? And Lamont took me in the same way that Marilyn did in other ways. Marilyn and I also wrote a book together. And as I'm getting rid of my archives donation-wise, I'm sending a couple books to the William Way Center, among others.
Yeah, yeah.
And I've been trying. It's so hard to donate stuff sometimes. And but no, Lamont was really good people, and he it's interesting too because Lamont went through a lot in Vietnam. You know,
He was what they call a gutter rat or a rat guy, one of those guys who crawl into those tunnels
Yeah.
to look for bombs. And you had to be of small stature.
Yeah.
And that's an incredible job. He could have been blown up in an instant. And he would often talk about PSSD experiences that this affected him forever. It's probably what made him so spiritual. Here was a guy who wore a miraculous medal around his neck with Tibetan crystals and everything else that you can think of. Talked about going to France and viewing the bodies of saints in cathedrals who had not decomposed, who then also claimed that he was abducted by UAPs. I mean, it just goes on and on with Lamont.
Yeah. So you were mentioning the poetry, and I think I can give hopefully within a minute or two, how I got involved with that. Okay, so I'm around 30 years old. I'm separated from my second wife, and I'm working, but I'm living alone on a flat on South 12th Street when South Philly was still South Philly. Okay, and so I ended up writing a couple novels, which I finally relocated. I'm trying to get published, but that's another story. Anyway, as I'm doing all of that, one night I go out to a poetry reading, which was a group called Open Mouth Poetry, which was founded by Chris Pedito and Elizabeth June Madden. And it turns out, after going to a few of these, they approached me and a woman named Christine Oswald and basically said, "Hey, we're tired. Will you guys take it over?" So that's how I got involved. And then when I started going to the Bacchanal series, the guy running that was Pat Hinchy, and he had to leave town, I'll put it that way.
Yeah.
And so a committee was started. And when we started it, we realized that when the London Restaurant Poetry Series went out of business, they had that was just it. So when we got started, we created a mailing list. We became a nonprofit. We got grants from the state, who luckily never came to attend any of our readings. I think that was good.
Right.
And the city. And we continued with that for quite a while. And at that point, there were maybe every night there was a different reading. We had Monday nights, and Robbins had Tuesday nights, et cetera, et cetera. It was very alive and vibrant. And at a certain point, I got more involved in politics. And I just, when you feel like you get tired of doing something, and it's not the job that you're making your living on, then maybe it's time to just go. And I figured if someone else wanted to pick it up, they could. And if not, just that was that. But we did readings in Delaware County, Philadelphia, and whole lots of different places.
That was a great time in the city of Philadelphia. You had like Rachel Harlow's Bank, you had the Black Banana, you had the Astral Plane. The city was at its finest then. And since COVID, I think it's been a slow downhill escalator. I'm still trying to rediscover the city the way it used to be. So let's get out the violins.
Yeah. Well, there's a line I have. You can't go home again because it isn't there.
Oh.
And that happened. I was thinking about the people from Move, for instance.
Well, yeah.
But I think things have changed so much. And I know even in the 80s and 90s, you wouldn't see people staring into their phones.
It was more eye contact, and if you caught somebody's eye, you could have an immediate sidewalk startup conversation.
Yeah.
That you like met people all the time because there was no phone, and so you always had a circular of new friends. People weren't afraid to sort of reach out in public. That's all changed. It's just fascinating to like see these changes.
Well, it's funny how people come up to me. I had a letter in the Swarthmorean, which is a local newspaper, about these parking apps. And people came up to me and we talked for 10 minutes. They told me how much they liked the letter. I never would get their name sometimes. But it's just because people, in Swarthmore still read, and, and I guess I've hung out here long enough in Swarthmore in Delaware County that I'm somewhat of a local celebrity, but it's just interesting. I remember one time I was walking down Broad Street, and Joe Tiberino, he was walking on the other side. He was the co-owner of Bacchanal, and he called me over. He saw me. So, I crossed and managed not to get hit. And the first thing he said to me, he said, "It's all your blanking fault." And I said, "What?" He said, "Well, when you stopped drinking, we ended up closing the bar." And it was true. About a year after I got sober, they closed the bar.
Yeah.
But that's how people would see you and engage, rather than say him sending me an email saying, "I saw you on the street today." And
I never had a drinking problem, but I would go occasionally to Dirty Frank's in Center City. And I never liked that bar. It was a big arts and bohemian hangout, like the Pen and Pencil Club, which used to be an after hours journalist bar. But now it's an everybody's bar. It's completely changed. But Dirty Frank's, they had the worst wine in the city. I got so sick from 2 glasses of red wine in there. I don't know. They were just not a wine bar, but it was a bar to drink beer and get drunk and be bohemian and just who cares about tomorrow?
Well, we actually did a poetry reading or two at Dirty Frank's because they invited us. It was very chaotic. We did do a fairly long series at the Pen and Pencil Club. I think Marilyn had got us in there, actually.
Well, they had a great chef there once upon a time. They had a very economic, sensibly priced snack bar. You could get a hamburger. Everything was amazingly reasonable. And then they went totally upscale. It became, what? Have you seen the new menu? And from the new menu, they went to nothing. They went to chips and beer. So that was a result of the COVID lockdown. So I don't know what the status is now. So Bob Small, I want to thank you for being the first guest of Curious Culture. Thank you for coming out.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you so much, Bob, for a great first edition of Curious Culture. I hope to cover a lot more topics in the future. You'll probably be surprised at the kind of guests that I have, so please stay tuned. Curious Culture, here we go.